I'm the last of the acts this evening, ladies and gentlemen. May I just say how very nice it is to see so many friendly faces and Ken Pritchard.
Run away, Simon.
Right, the canteen cowboy came and took him away. I look forward to him coming back, then I'll be rude to him again. But seriously, it's very nice to be here, and thank you very much for looking after this evening. So far I've had a wonderful evening. I'm sure it's going to get better as the evening goes on. I just want to remind you, that, as if you didn't know, that in July this year we celebrate 40 years of the formation of the present regiment. During those 40 years we've been quite busy. I actually joined after my formation, and so I remember it all. We started off in Hereford. Ken, you're late, get Hereford, Osnabrück, Sonalaga, Catterick, Fallingbostel, Catterick again, Fallingbostel again, and so it goes on. By 2015, the regiment will have been in Fallingbostel for this particular tour for 20 years, which is quite a long time by anybody's stretch of imagination. And I'll remind you that nowadays in Germany, life is not what it used to be in terms of all the perks and the financial allowances that we used to enjoy. It's no longer the financial paradise it used to be. You can get cheap booze and you get cheap cigarettes. Okay, so what's wrong with that? But you don't get the cheap cars, you don't get the good quality of life, you don't get the NOA that you used to. And it's not quite the place that it used to be. And believe it or not, after all this time, the majority of the regiment to whom I spoke about 6 weeks ago were actually quite keen to come back to this country. In addition to the places we've been, we've also played our part on operations. And most of you here would be what we call the Cold War warriors, sitting in a dripping beechwood with a mug of tea and a sandwich with oily finger marks all over it, thinking you were having fun, writing letters home. And you were actually defending Europe from the mighty Soviet hordes. And you did a great job, because they never came. So you can pat yourselves on the back for that. But we also went to Northern Ireland. The regiment went to Kosovo, it went to Bosnia, it went to Kuwait, it's been in Iraq, it's been in Afghanistan before, and it's back in Afghanistan now. We've been on Ferret Scout cars, Saladins, Saracens. We've had Challengers, we've had Chieftains, we're on Challenger 2s, and now we've got Mastiffs, Bulldogs, you name it. Basically, throw it at us. If it's got tracks, no problem. And that's where we are today. The guys are in Afghanistan driving these extraordinary over-the-snow vehicles called Warthogs, which are what the Marines used over the snow, called BB 202, 206 a few years ago. Now they've armoured them, put guns on them, but the Marines don't understand them, so they've given them to us and say, get out there and attack. Last year there was a thing called the Strategic Defence and Security Review, SDSR, and a lot of us listened very carefully to the radio and read papers very carefully to see what it was going to mean for the Royal Armoured Corps and in particular this regiment. All that we've managed to glean so far is the likelihood in 2015 and not before is that we will lose one of our squadrons. We've got 4 at the moment, we may go down to 3. We've been there before, it's like a yo-yo, we can cope, shouldn't be a problem. Let's hope that that's all that there is that will happen. And indeed, the things that are going on around the world at the moment, kicked off in Tunisia, followed by Egypt, Libya, still going on a little bit, Yemen, Bahrain, Ivory Coast, you name it. Everybody's jumping on the revolution bandwagon. Meanwhile, the Iranians... Do what? And no doubt part of Manchester this evening. But meanwhile, the Iranians sail their warships up the Suez Canal, and the Israelis get very worried and dust off all their contingency plans. Is now a good time to have a strategic defence review and cut the forces, you may ask yourself. And a very good question, well answered. So we'll have to see what happens. The regiment, meanwhile, as you've heard, is in Afghanistan. There is 1 squadron still to go. They are there in support of 3 Commando Brigade, and they're split up, and they're not commanded by the commanding officer who's got a separate job in the brigade headquarters, but they're split up into squadrons. 1 squadron is running these vehicles called Mastiffs, And they will live off those vehicles for the entire 6 months that they are there. All their kit and everything else like that. The Mastiffs and the Warthogs. And these vehicles have got armament, they've got armour plating, and this will become their home for the next 6 months. Another squadron is looking after the Afghan army and Afghan police, and is mentoring them and advising them and training them. But at the end of the day, it's the Afghans' decision whether or not they want to play. So our guys can just say, well, if I were you, I wouldn't do that, or I would do that, and it's up to the Afghans to do it or not. Because, of course, it's their country. We go there for 6 months, reinvent the wheel that the last lot did the 6 months before, and the Afghans roll their eyes and say, yeah, well, we'll do it when we get round to it. They've had a busy year, the regiment, as you would probably imagine. You would remember back to your times when you would go on troop training, squadron training, regimental training. You'd go away for weeks and weeks and weeks. Well, most of the regiment's been away out of barracks, nights out of bed as they call it, for 6 months of this year. So they've been away from their families for 6 months already. They kicked it off with Bathurst in Canada. For those of you who've been there, some of you will know it well. They went to Salisbury Plain, they went to Warminster, they went to Plymouth, because this is the first time that a regiment from Germany has deployed to Afghanistan. Hitherto it's always been from this country. And so that brings added complications, particularly on the welfare side. And if things start to go wrong, you've got soldiers who are married to German girls with families in Germany being transported across to Birmingham, and it just gets very messy. I have to tell you that it's all very swept up indeed. There's a fantastic system in place. We have an amazing welfare officer, used to be called the families officer, in a guy called Al Haney, and he's got it all swept up. And we get frequent bulletins and sit-reps. So far, somebody sprained his ankle. I think I've had about 6 emails in the last 24 hours about this guy who sprained his ankle. He's not coming back, much to his annoyance. But after Bathurst, the other things that they've been doing is teaching the Commando Brigade all about vehicles. Commandos know all about water and walking around on their feet. They don't know much about vehicles. So while our regiment was trying to get itself to Afghanistan and learn all about what it was supposed to be doing there, it also had to teach the commandos how to run their vehicles. So they ran this crew training school at the same time in Germany. And that went down extremely well. In the meantime, they went across to Dorset, and they took part in the Royal Armoured Corps Sports Challenge, and they wiped the floor with the entire Royal Armoured Corps. It's called Hodson's Horse. They won the cup, which is absolutely fantastic. Set the scene, they went back to Germany, and the brigade commander, a feisty young infantry officer, decided he'd have a brigade sports competition, all the rough and tumble infantry battalions and everybody else in the brigade, and the regiment wiped the floor with everybody else in the brigade. One of the squadrons is attached to 4 Scots, used to be called the Highlanders, and they are going to go to Afghanistan on their feet as infantry soldiers. They've been attached to 4 Scots now for about 6 months, learning how to be infantrymen. The commanding officer of the 4 Scots decided that he wanted to introduce a little team spirit into his battalion, so we had a battalion sports day. Unfortunately, along came C Squad of the Royal Scottish Guards and took off all the trophies. Anyway, exactly, it never changes. Anyway, most of them are there. There's still the remnants of 1 squadron still to go at the end of this month, and then they will be there until the autumn, basically. And there will be a few homecoming parades and things, mainly in Scotland, and then they will get back to a training year next year. While they are there, we have to make sure that they're looked after. Now, the system is fantastic, and we've already alluded to this appeal called Caring for Courage. The system set up by the Ministry of Defence, which has been tested in Iraq already and in Afghanistan, is very good. There are inevitably gaps that we as a family regiment would feel more than others. For example, not all of the extended family of soldiers who are killed or wounded are necessarily taken care of because there is a finite limit to the resources of the Ministry of Defence. Fair enough. So that is what we're aiming to plug, those gaps. We're aiming, as you've heard, to raise just over £1 million in 12 months. And that is why I am not asking you to put your hand in your pockets this evening, although already Maidstone has been very generous. It is fantastic. What we need is schemes, good ideas, and ways of raising money, because we're not actually asking to donate a small amount of money to a new museum or something like that. This is big deal stuff. We employed a professional fundraiser, and we're looking outside at beneficiaries, philanthropists from across the water in Canada or the States, as well as in this country. The serving regiment themselves will play their part with bicycling to John O'Groats from Land's End or whatever it is to raise money. But this is where the association can really, really make a difference as the third strand of the fundraising family. What is really important is if you have any really good schemes that you can enact that will bring in money, we want to hear about them. You've also heard about the tins. The idea of rattling tins may seem quite comical to some people. However, research has shown that one person rattling a tin for one day usually raises more than £100. Now, it is a fact that if 6 branches of the association had one person every day for 6 months rattling that tin, we'd make £108,000. It's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. So those are the things that can be done that are the art of the achievable. And anything you can do, I promise you, will be really gratefully received. And when this was put to the regiment, about 6 weeks ago, that the association was getting involved in raising money for the regiment, the wives' club who were there and a lot of the soldiers who were there simply couldn't believe it. They were blown away by the fact that people back here actually cared enough to raise money to look after them while they were on an operational tour, and it really means a lot to them, I can tell you that for free. So that's really all I want to say. I want to wind up really by thanking you once again, especially now you're back in the room, Ken. Although why were so many former members of the Provo here, he was allowed in anyway, I'm not quite sure.
Keep an eye on you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've got a fantastic branch here, but can I ask you to stand up please and drink the health of the Regimental Association? The association.